What do a speaking coach, a strategy consultant, and a UX UI designer have in common? Sounds like the start of a bad joke, right? But honestly, it's all about finding out what people really do in their jobs. The stories, the struggles, the coffee breaks. The real stuff you won't find in a job title.
Welcome to a space where we sit down with people from all kinds of careers, have a laugh, and dive into what makes their work meaningful. Whether you're looking to learn something new or just here for a good story, let us be your guide. I'm Geoff.
And I'm Charlie.
And let's get
Casually
Bro! Woo!
Awesome. Okay. So today we have a really cool part of design, something that I'm not familiar with, but I want to learn all about. We have Itzy Ramirez, who is a UX UI designer for about the past 10 years, who really loves to delve into social impact. Itzy, thank you for being with us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, first of all, let's talk about what you do. Tell us what you do, hopefully in simple terms, because
Mhm.
I am about as technically literate as your average rock. And tell us why you think it's so cool.
Yeah, so I am a UX UI designer. So that is both user experience designer and user interface designer. So sometimes people call it product design, but I prefer to use UX UI because product design can seem more like to design physical products, and UX UI is like more for digital products, for apps and digital websites. So
Mhm.
so let's say I guess I can use an analogy here, more like people say that it's more like a lot like cooking. When you're
Okay.
cooking a dish, you want to cook something good, right? That everybody will get to enjoy. Like you gather your ingredients and then you come up, with a great dish. That's a lot like the user experience. Like you kind of have to think about what a user needs, what the user needs and wants are their goals, and find a solution to the problems that they're having in a digital product, like let's say an app or a website. So yeah, I guess the analogy can be kind of correct where you want to appeal to multiple people, right? You want to create something, you want to have a good experience, you want to something that people are going to come to a website and they're going to feel happy, they're going to feel like they're achieving their need. Like before you didn't need that as much, but because of the digital revolution now, you need to be able to book an appointment online. You need to be able to send an application. So you need that to be useful. You need it to be user friendly. You need to have the user have a good experience. Uh, so that's pretty much user experience in a nutshell.
Okay. So that's UX.
Mhm.
What's the other side?
So user interface is interesting because it's more about how a website behaves. That's more how a website, a user is interacting with the website, like how what is, the interaction, like how things are animated, or the visual, like how is it gonna look, and how a user, sometimes that's a combination of the user experience because the user interface is gonna interfere with solving a problem for the user. So the way that you're searching, the interactions that a website have is gonna be important to solve the problem for the user as well. So it's more visual, it's more about the website behavior. So the two of them combined, it's user experience. In the past, they were separate fields. It was the user experience and then it was the UI. But now there is a new field that is called product design that actually comes from designing physical products. But yeah, or sometimes people say digital product design, but it's more like just UX UI combined.
Okay.
Does that
Very
make
cool.
sense?
Yeah. So what you're saying is that UI traditionally has been more just like visual, kind of the
Mhm.
wrapping, so to
The
speak. And
interactions. Mhm.
yeah, and then UX is more of the nitty-gritty, how a user actually uses the digital product.
Yeah, so yeah, I think user experience is more about how a user feels when they come to an app, like a website. And UI is more about how the website behaves for the user. That's the difference.
Could you give us a very specific example on a project you worked on so that we can really grasp the difference between the two?
Okay, yes, I can talk to you about a project that I worked on. So a friend worked on this film, a friend that I've known for many years, and she needed a website. So she had a very specific need to showcase this film so that she could apply for, funding for the film. And so she asked me to create a website to showcase the film. So when we started doing the research, we found out that the users were interested in learning more details about the website, about how it was done, how it was produced, but they also kind of needed, because of the nature of the film, they wanted to have resources for people. This specific field was more for an immigration justice film type with a message. And so they found out that people actually needed to have resources for immigrants, or for they wanted to know more information about what the issues is. So we needed to design those things so that people can come to this website and leave something behind. So those things were important, but it's also important to have a visual design that went with the branding of the film, because we had a very specific branding that was more indigenous because of the nature of this film. And if you look at the storyline, it had a lot to do with the immigrant experience in the United States, and the indigenous roots, and feeling proud about your heritage. And it had a very strong message. So we had to really, from the visual design perspective, show that into the website as well.
Would you say that cultural experiences also impact, maybe not so much just the visual appearance of things, because
Mhm.
they have to have something to relate to, but maybe how they might interact with a digital product, or a website, or something, that they might not have the same concerns with someone from a non-indigenous background, for example.
Yeah, exactly. We had to have an experience that, for example, we found out a lot of the users spoke Spanish, so we needed to, and they were going to be reading it, so it needed to be accessible in the Spanish language. So it was something that they could relate to, and also, yeah, the visual design and the cultural experience too was important for sure.
On a more, I read on your LinkedIn page, Itzy,
Mm-hmm.
that you are during your work you are conducting user research. And I think
Mm-hmm.
this is something that many new founders or many new business owners tend to forget, to talk with the people who's gonna use the product at the end. Could you tell us a little bit how you do those interviews? What kind of data you get? What type of questions you ask?
Uh yeah, that's such an interesting point, right? Like, yeah, that's something that it's definitely can be challenging for businesses. So, the user research part, you kind of has to specifically target a specific problem, right? Like you have a problem that you're trying to solve. So you have to there's specific criteria that the user needs to meet for a business, because it's going to be very different when you're designing for somebody, for example, that is trying to stay healthy versus somebody who's trying to lose weight. That's going to be a different experience. So you have to really know, have a persona, think about somebody who's gonna, the people that are gonna be using your problem, and ask those people specific questions about the problem that you're trying to solve, to find out information about how you can improve their experience. So it's a very user-centric process where you really do need to ask your customer, or we say user because sometimes it's not a customer, it can be a subscriber, it can be a customer, but or so it's called user, but it's mostly just a person, right? So the people that are going to be using your product, and you have to ask for specific questions about their day to day, what types of problems are they encountering, what steps do they take, to what workarounds they use to solve to ideate solutions for the needs that they have, the problems that they're having. Does that
So
answer your question?
yeah, you really have to understand what they're
Mhm.
doing so that you know how you can help them. And
Mhm.
how do you get them to, in a meeting or in a call, do you just reach out to them and you say, hey, would you agree to have an interview? Is it
Uh,
as simple as that?
yeah, you have to recruit a specific type of user that you need. So there's different ways. Um, Sometimes there is a recruitment period that you gather some companies have already a customer base and you can reach out to those customers, or you can use like a recruiter, a recruitment service, or you can just do what most people do, which is guerrilla research, which you would then, tap into different communities and, you know, finding a specific type of user. That's pretty much how it takes time and it can be challenging, but yeah, it's usually better to speak to an actual user and find out their needs, so that business goals are also important. So the business is also important because that's, it's a business, they need to make money, but if you can align those business goals with your user need, that can be very powerful and very impactful for a business.
I'm imagining somewhere out there is a UX UI designer that is somehow also taking on a lead marketing role, trying to contact so many different types of people that are their user base, saying like, "Hey, does this work? Can you tell me if
Mm.
this works? Is this exactly what you're looking for? If not, please explain how." It seems like a weird intermix of what people would traditionally think of as a marketing role, but with a very technically focused area, which is, I can create code that changes the entire perception over how this product looks for someone and feels for someone, right? So, hopefully there's not too many of those people being thrusted into the midst of a marketing chaos campaign. But with that being said, would you say that users are really kind of perceptive to change? I mean, I'm thinking from my point of view, if I'm using an app for, years and years and years, well, okay, maybe not too many years. I don't want to date myself, but uh, and a button changes. I wonder, does that really impact my experience? Am I really going to notice that the button went from left to right? Uh, or is it going to be just a cosmetic change that makes me feel like, oh, well, I mean, someone's doing something on the back end. Do you feel like you get a lot of feedback from the kind of changes that you make? Or is it just, oh, okay, that's cool.
Well, yeah, definitely does make an impact because like most people are used to doing things a certain way, and they're just we're just as humans, we're just very like we think in patterns. We like to follow a specific pattern, right? So there is already designed patterns that exist that most people use, like a Facebook feed, for example. It's a similar to a LinkedIn feed and an Instagram feed because there's a pattern to that. People are used to these types of things. So when you change a button from left, from a specific place to another, like, yes, it's going to have an impact on the user. Of course, they are they are going to it is going to have an impact, and usually you test those requirements, right? You need to. This is why it's important to get feedback from user during what we call usability testing, where you present the user with a prototype and they test it to see how they're reacting to it, if it's meeting the needs, if it's validating your design. eh, that's why it's important to include usability testing during the process.
And can you tell us a bit more about this process to make the user interface better? What kind of tests you're using? What kind of data you're retrieving in order to make sure that the product is indeed getting better?
Yeah, so yeah, like I mentioned, usability the testing is something that is used and to validate your design decisions when you're making them. And so there's many different ways of doing that. Before there was anything digital, you had to go to the user and show them the physical prototype, and they can, you have certain tasks that you ask the user to do. And but now there's many software that you can use where you can upload your design and it will tell you. You can set up a different task to do for the user, and it will tell you, like, once you measure how much time people are spending in each task, you measure the success, and then you can see the improvements in the design. That way you save a lot of time from production and iterations and changes once it goes into uh, for the development team.
I'm almost wondering how far down does the rabbit hole go with testing and measurement? Because I'm imagining that same process, right? But there are some measurements that it's better for a user to have longer interactions with. It's worse if they have longer interactions with. And somewhere, I mean, it's almost negligible, right? So
Mhm.
in doing that, I'm sure there's like a whole nother step, or maybe it's even a whole nother position where it's like measuring that level of measurement, right? Or and doing the analysis on that level of measurement. Is that something that you go through, or that maybe like a more senior UX UI designer kind of like goes through to start building those analytics in the back end, so that more, I guess, in the trenches UX UI designers are now feeding into that process? I'm so curious to know, where does it stop?
Well, there's different metrics that can be used to measure the success too, like analytics that maybe you might have that can tell you whether it's working for a business. For example, like I know that some companies sometimes can't do user research because there is a legal requirement, data privacy or something. And so they rely on metrics and analytics to find out problems in the design and then solve it. So so I guess to answer your question, like when does it stop? It's an iterative process. So once an application or a website is live, the testing continues. But once you start seeing less errors in the usability testing, then you know that your product is successful once the user is accomplishing certain tasks that are that you have required them to do.
So I think I understand in terms of maybe like a niche product where it's one very specific user that looks at something and it's only going to have that specific level of functionality or interpretation for them, right? But how would something that has to have mass amount of users or I guess maybe like different types of users all coming together on the same platform, is it just a more complex version of that? Or are there like separate systems in place to make sure that, yeah, okay, this type of user is having a good experience, but when you go to this part of your app or website or whatever you're building, the other kind of user is kind of being more prioritized, so on and so forth. Is it just the same thing, more complex, or is it a whole nother kind of ball game?
It depends, right? Depends who your user is. Like some people have different types of users. For example, I used to work for a company that had a user baseline that was over 65. So it's going to be very different experience. But they also had, a target demographic that was a little bit younger, like that was like mid 30s to 40s. So you do have to appeal to both users. So you have two different personas that you're focusing on that have specific needs and goals. So I have never worked for like a larger company. I mostly worked for like mid-sized to small businesses. I don't know how a larger company like Meta, for example, but I do know that there's a specific like persona that you use to identify what the needs of the user, and it doesn't have to be just one, it can be multiple. So yeah, those are taken into consideration. And I know for a fact that companies like Meta do have try to appeal to like the majority of users because they have such a high volume of user base. But I don't work there, so I wouldn't be able to tell you like how they do things.
Do you please define the term persona? I think you already used it twice during this interview, but we didn't really go deeper into what notion it is and how it is used.
Good question. So a persona is actually like a user profile, something, that the teams use to empathize with a user. So what types of users? So you put a name to a persona, demographics are important. And then you kind of like from the research, you start to identify in user goals and needs. And you kind of have a little story about a user, like let's say a user is, for example, for my the project that the film that I worked on, Papelas Muyos, um, we had a very specific user persona. It was the social activist. It was we knew that it was a younger crowd. We knew that it was, we had 25 to 35, but we also had another user that was the elder that was a little bit older that we also needed to take into consideration for accessibility purposes. So we came up with a story about, a social activist and what they will need. And, and maybe they are in graduate school, they're working towards their degree, and they're passionate about social justice, and so we come up with like a little story to help us empathize with that type of users. Did that answer your
Would,
question?
would you say that it's you have this product and you have many or more than one type of
Mm-hmm.
people who use it, and the
Mm-hmm.
persona is somehow one of those types of users that you have and that you
Yeah.
analyze. Charles, we talked about how to make traveling accessible, but digital products also have to be accessible. And it's very interesting, it's that what you just said, that if you want to make sure that your product is accessible, one of those persona can be a person with a handicap. And then you make sure that your product is indeed accessible for everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. Accessibility is a huge topic too, because a user might be somebody who is visually impaired, and they need to be able to read your website from on audio. So they're gonna be just listening in. So you have, how do you design for that? You have to follow specific specific requirements that have been implemented by the web consortium that you follow in order for them to be able to access your website.
Kind of leaning into this idea of impact and social activism, I'm curious because I think when we imagine the kind of professions that are really aligned in our preconception of what social activism needs, right? We can think of people in marketing, we can think of people in community building, but how does UX UI directly interact with social activism, at least in your experience?
Well, like aspect of it, like the human caring about like your users, because that's something that I didn't see before. I have a background in graphic design, actually. Like I went to school for graphic design, and it was more like visual, and it was more about the business needs. It was not so much about the user. So when I first pivoted to user experience design, that's the part that I enjoy more, that it's more user centric, and you are focused more on the end user, the person that is going to be they need to access your website. So I think that in a way um, is kind of like the overlap, I guess. Maybe like other people might disagree with me, but to me, that's exciting. That's why I pivoted to user experience, user UI design, because yeah, I felt like I had more impact for users. And graphic design, well, it's more client based. It's more you're being asked to do something for a business, and the business has specific requirements that you need to fulfill. And it's more visual. It's more you can't really measure whether that is going to be successful or not. You just It's more based on what the business needs. And so that's why I became a user experience designer, actually, because I wanted to have more impact on the end user.
So, would you say that it's more of an intimate level of connection with your user than a traditional, maybe like back end developer? Say,
Hmm.
if you're working on a database and how to pull in information from it, people or customers or users are just numbers on a screen. But for you, it's getting into their head, whether it's through an application or a persona, like you spoke of earlier, but you are actively and intimately trying to solve interface problems with them in mind.
Hmm.
So maybe that is the more human element, so to speak, of development. The bridge between design and the actual real life human experience.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. That's really, yeah, the human experience, the human behaviors and interactions, that how people are interacting with a digital product, and yeah, what are their motivations, what are their needs. I think those are all taken into consideration.
It seems that you are in a very particular position with this job. That you're talking to the clients,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking to the tech who are building the product, you
Mm-hmm.
talk with marketing, you talk with sales, you communicate with everyone. Could you tell us how you specifically adapt to all those different people you are talking to? I work with many people in tech, and one of the things I help them with is to talk to people who don't speak tech. So maybe you can also tell us a little bit about how frustrating it can be to talk about with software engineers who are too technical.
Right. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. So yeah, definitely, it's a very strategic role because yeah, specifically you need to be able to talk to different types of people in different roles, and it's you have to be able to collaborate and um, make decisions about justify the decisions that you're making to these people, which is like your stakeholder, people that are making decisions about like what you're gonna implement. So yeah, it's very important. Communication and collaboration are like a top requirements for this role. So I guess to answer your question is, yeah, you have to talk differently to different types of people. Like you're not gonna communicate the same way to somebody in marketing, somebody in sales, as to somebody in development, right? So it can be challenging, but I think the collaboration piece comes into place where you kind of have to bring people together and communicate an idea and yeah, gathering, technical requirements and checking in with your software engineers and figuring out whether something is can be implemented or not is going to be crucial. And so you have to you're kind of that bridge where from like sales and marketing to like development and product management. Usually the product manager is the one that is like managing the project and communicating, making sure. So um the way that I collaborate is I try to uh, bring people together with me in the process to um, facilitate conversations that need to happen and facilitating workshops, for example, for ideation with different teams to get their input is a big part of the role, communicating my ideas and why and I'm making this decision for the user. Why is this important? And yeah, sometimes unavoidably you're gonna get some pushback because something is not able to be implemented technically, and that's important for you to know so that you can design around it and you can come up with a better solution that is gonna work for the business, that is gonna work for the user. So that's why it's important to bring people together and to facilitate those discussions. It's tough, yeah.
It seems to be a very human role. And I wonder, since you basically talk to everyone in the organization, it probably happens that you figure out there are some problems. For example, the tech team have some problems and they need to interact with the marketing team. But since you're the one who know everyone, you can make those connections yourself and you can help them fix their problems. Is it something that happens to you?
Uh, yes and no. It depends on the project. It depends on the project because yeah, but yeah, definitely just bringing people together and having those conversations is going to be crucial. It's going to be important. It's going to be important to bringing in people as for earlier in the process, because sometimes what happens is that the development team gets brought in later in the process, and then um, the, you figure out that they can build what you were making. So that's why it's important to communicate and to involve people earlier in the process, as opposed to in the end.
I am really curious about that process just because I kind of can conceptualize the idea that there might be things that you have to kind of work around in terms of a technical standpoint, kind of the opposite in terms of like you can imagine something, but building it on the back end might be much more complex than just saying it and putting it out right. But you mentioned that there might be cases where building something on the back end might not work or might not be feasible, and then you have to design around that. Could you give us some examples or just something to help kind of collate the information that might be relevant to why design can help the back end?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll give you an example. So, well, I guess I'll give you an example from something that I came up with recently. So, for example, I'm working for the Papa Los Muelles website, right? So we ideated a solution that in order to engage our user, we're gonna have this feature that was gonna be able that the user is gonna be able to interact with, and that they're gonna be able to create their own art that they can share on social media, right? But once we realized that because of budget, we don't have the ability to make that happen. That there is technical limitations. So we iterate. We instead of having this complicated feature, we scale it down to maybe having an image that people can share on social media, that they can create their hashtag and their for Instagram, that they can share on their Facebook too, so that they can participate on the experience. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of interesting workarounds that you don't really consider when you imagine how technical, and I wouldn't say non-technical, well, certainly non-technical, but how highly technical and more creative technical solutions can come together. When you are kind of building solutions, I know you have a specific user in mind, but do you ever experiment just on your own, or with maybe a separate type of profile to expand your kind of repertoire of solutions? Maybe instead of making a button a specific size, you can make it a different shape. Maybe you can have a drop down instead of like a sliding scale. Are there different ways that you kind of like to match problems to creative designs?
Well, I mean, you have to kind of like have the user in mind at all the times. So I guess you definitely there's a creative aspect to it where like you can try different solutions on user. But yeah, like you kind of have to test those ideas, right? You can have there's a certain amount of creativity that comes in, but it's big, but it's almost like I don't want to say you're limited, but I guess you kind of have to consider like the user at all the times. So you kind of have to test when you want. So if you have some like a creative idea, like for a button, for example, like you can, if you're trying to test if the button is going to work for the user, then you can rely on things like A/B testing to figure out which experience is best for the user. That's kind of like how you can test a solution that if it's going to work for the user or not.
So in what I'm understanding
Hmm.
is that it's less of a mindset of creative solution, uh
Hmm.
sandbox style, right? The
Hmm.
the the way that you would come up with a weird and zany idea for a different kind of image or user interface, and more of a you're constantly putting yourself in the shoes of your user and saying, okay, it's not so much limitation as it is I have X amount of space and ideas within my interpretation of a person or a user, so to speak. How do I come up with creative ideas and creative things that might be a step above what would be expected of me inside of that notion? So you're constantly having your user in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's user-centered design. That is the most important thing. So yeah, you do kind of have to consider. So I don't want to say you cannot get too innovative because there's a lot of people doing great things and innovating all the time. But I think that you do kind of have to be mindful of like what type of user like you're designing for. So so let's say you're designing for somebody who is like over 65, well, you cannot have like many like fancy fonts because it's gonna be hard for them to read because they have a low vision. So you kind of can't, I don't want to say you can't innovate as much, but you do kind of have to be mindful. when designing a product for a specific type of user. And it doesn't mean that they can have modern things, but yeah, just there's just certain things to keep in mind when you are designing. But there is certain level of creativity when you're coming up with solutions for user, for example, and looking at the competitors, like what are the ways that our people are solving a problem, you know? So that's when you can iterate and be inspired to come up with a specific feature, for example. So you might look at something that a competitor is doing, or you might find areas where you can improve, where you can excel. So yeah, that's a way to innovate and add certain amount of creativity.
So it's less like creating incredible solutions, more like creating things in mind with your user that maybe
Mm-hmm.
might not have been done, and that's the level of innovation you're looking at. Like for example, you're 65 and over, instead of having once you click, the font changes completely into something different and might confuse them, might make it harder to read or something like that. Instead, you click the button and then maybe it speaks out loud exactly what the text is saying, something that might
Mm-hmm.
help them
Mm-hmm.
bridge the gap between
Exactly.
understanding
Mm-hmm.
and action. Okay, that makes more sense.
Exactly. Thanks.
So I guess we're talking a lot about hypothetical users and hypothetical profiles and personas, but personally, I know uh, the best kind of examples and the best kind of stories that you get are from people that you actually help. And for me, as a consultant, I love telling people about my favorite clients,
Mm-hmm.
without names, of course. But is there like a specific kind of persona or community that you like helping in terms of your design work?
Mhm. Well, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So yes, so I had like a very interesting experience. Like I back in 2012, I was asked to design for an organization based in Guatemala, and so this was back in 2012, right? So uh, we didn't have things like Zoom. We didn't, the pandemic wasn't here. So we back then we were using something like Skype. So we were having a lot of difficulties like communicating certain things. So I actually had to go all the way to Guatemala to help this team, this nonprofit. No, it wasn't a nonprofit. It was an organization there. And to help these people have design a website. And so, yeah, so all of a sudden I was confronted with an entirely different environment that I am used to. And so I had to really understand like uh, like why certain decisions were being made because this website's purpose was for this organization to raise funds for them to continue to help indigenous communities in Guatemala because unbeknownst to me, Guatemala is a very there's multiple different types of Mayan indigenous communities there, and so I had to understand the culture, and I had to really immerse myself in the culture to understand how to design this website for them. So it was very challenging, and I had to you know, really get out of my comfort zone and try to understand this the culture. And like I am Mexican and I'm very proud of my heritage and I'm really proud of being Mexicans. But I had a very little understanding about indigenous communities and Mayan indigenous communities because I didn't have that reference. Even though there's many indigenous communities in Mexico, I was very removed from that. And I'm from the north. I'm from Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, and we are much very influenced by North American culture. So I didn't understand a lot of the culture there. So that really like opened my mind to understanding people and indigenous people specifically, and understanding my own heritage, like connecting with my own indigenous heritage as well. So that was a very pivotal moment for me in my career. And in terms, and I didn't know anything about user experience back then. Like it was a very new field. It wasn't as popular as it is right now. So it did kind of like set me up to come back and to keep learning more about these types of things, like user experience, but also reconnect with my own indigenous heritage. So I started understanding more of the stories about indigenous communities in Mexico, and they're very amazing stories that come in that are in a consciousness still in Mexico. There's a lot. They have a lot of like really beautiful stories. There's a lot of knowledge there, that was kind of lost, that it's now resurfacing, and it's kind of interesting, to witness that. And I try to somehow incorporate that into my my designs. Maybe not my user experience designs, but like my own personal designs, I guess.
Claro, mi
Wow.
hermana.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What are you saying?
Well, for those of you who don't know, I am also Mexican, very proud of it as well. Although I hail from a little further south than Itzy. I'm from Mexico City, but it's a very unique thing because I think we kind of culturally identify, and this isn't just a Mexican thing. This is everyone, right? We culturally identify with our immediate geography and our immediate social understanding of where we're from, right? I mean, uh, Jeffrey, you are uniquely very French, but you're also very, very proud of Strasbourg. That's what you are. I because you don't know this, Hitzy, but once upon a time, when I found out that he was first from Strasbourg, I told him that he was the second best thing to come out of Strasbourg.
Ooh,
And
and that broke my heart.
oh yeah,
That was
yeah,
hard. One of the
I
hardest moments I had in my life.
and, and I had to explain to him that, while I care for you very much, Geoff, my wife's family is ancestrally from Strasbourg. So he finally understood. He said, "Yeah, okay, I guess you have to love your wife
Yeah,
more than me, right?" But
yeah, that there are things in life that are better. And I was even a bit relieved because I saw that that's how things are meant to be. That you love your wife more than
geez, I
me.
hope so.
It can be hard, but I understand.
but getting back to the idea is just like there are a lot of things that influence us in our work. Um, and I think when you start to discover things either internally or exploring things at a deeper level than just your immediate geography or your immediate social kind of surroundings, you start to get a deeper appreciation of how people might view things, and you start to alter maybe your practices, or I guess in my practice, right? In what I do, I try to imagine what it's like to be someone who is doing something that I might never think about doing, right? But it's because they have an ingrained idea of what is right for them. And I think that can go along with any kind of differentiation in people, right? It's you found it in terms of your work with Indigenous people, and I'm sure in this experience, you created a lot of ideas over your designs and maybe the implementation of how you get things to work in a digital product. Um, to meet the needs of people that might not have an immediate understanding the way that someone who is coming from a tech background would have to use these products, right? I think
Right.
a lot of people can easily say that someone who is over the age of 65 might have difficulty working through an app or a website. But if you also don't have access to technology or regular access to technology, that might also impact your ability to use it. Could you maybe give us an example of a project that you worked on during your time working with Indigenous people that kind of really put you to the test as a designer to make things work for them?
Well, yeah, well, this specific project that I was working on, even though it wasn't specifically for Indigenous people, it was more for the organization to get funding from the US to be able to support them in doing their work. It really did give me an understanding about like how like what I like it kind of humbled me down like it I because indigenous people might not need technology at all. They don't use technology. They have their own technologies that they use themselves uh, in their day to day. And so I kind of had to learn that from them in order for me to be able to design this website that was going to fulfill that purpose for this organization to get funding. So in a way, like I had to learn from them, like they taught me how to collaborate. They taught me like how uh, to communicate something because uh, the way that they work as a community. It's not your it doesn't serve the purpose of one person. It's a community collaborative effort, and that's something that I had to understand. So I came in. Had been living in New York for a couple of years now, so I came in with a very individualistic perspective, and
Mm.
so when I went, I um, they taught me how to uh, look for the benefit of the whole of the community and not just for one person, for me. Or so that is what I learned. And I went back recently. I went to the state of Chiapas and I was there with Mayan communities there in San Cristobal. And yeah, the way that they work and the way that people work is to the benefit of the community. So they have certain principles that you have to adhere to, like you have to adhere to not imposing things. You have to propose things to the community. That's how they work. And in the way that they make decisions for the community, everybody has to be in agreement as a community to be able to make a decision. And so that really helped me uh, in my career, in my job, and in the interactions that I have every day with my colleagues to to understand, to like not impose something, but to propose, to look for the benefit of everyone, not just myself.
That's incredible. And in the spirit of community learning and understanding, a big part of why Geoff and I started this podcast was to inspire people who might not have an understanding of what you do at a super technical level, but might want to learn more. Or even people who might know a little bit more technically speaking, but are looking to take the next step in their career. And so, with that being said, what would you say is a skill or set of skills that really helped you get to where you are today when it comes to building your career as a UX UI designer?
Well, definitely collaboration and communication, and there were definitely like the top two that I would say have helped me, and that would really help somebody coming into the field to knowing how to talk to different types of people with different backgrounds, and staying open to change, because this is a field, because it's the technology that is constantly changing, constantly. When I was in college, I was studied graphic design, and there was a digital revolution happening. And when I graduated, all of a sudden you needed to know how to design a website. So you had to kind of constantly be open to change, and in the way that you're doing things. So we're going through another revolution, which is AI, artificial intelligence. And so you're starting to see a lot of disruptions, and a lot of people being laid off, and a lot of fears around it. So I don't necessarily think that UX design will cease to exist, but it is changing in the way that we are working. So in the future, we might be working very differently from the way that we've been working now. So you do have to kind of keep an open mind and learn all of these things, just like I did, transitioning from analog to digital. And it was very painful for some people, because a lot of people that work for magazines, that work as print designers, were laid off, and were now expected to know how to code, for example, know how to design digital products. And now, like, you're kind of seeing that again. A lot of people, they're being laid off, and for many different reasons, not specifically because of AI, but yeah, you're starting to see a shift, and it's going to be very exciting to see where this is going to take us. Like, we might be designing prompts now. We might be designing for AI. We might be working differently. It's going to, so I guess to anybody coming in, like, I will keep that in mind, to be open to always keep learning, and always be open to change.
Wow, so for people who are curious and want to learn more and who like to interact with people, this can be a very interesting career. Itzy, thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask you a special question that we ask all our guests. I'm gonna hand you the magic microphone. And the magic microphone that you will have for 2 minutes is very special. It gives you a chance to talk to everyone in the world. Imagine that everyone in the world will listen to what you say. But here's the thing, it's not just the people who are on the planet today, but also everyone from the future generation. Here's the magic mic. What would you like to tell them?
Well, to really be open to collaborating, and removing your ego a little bit, and stay open to learning from different types of people, and yeah, being mindful, take care of yourself. That's all.
Yes, thank you very much.
Awesome, quick, easy, and quite insightful. Well, Itzy, thank you so much for joining us. It was awesome having you on the show. If you made it this far, please make sure to like, comment, send it to a friend, and we'll be back with more great professionals, more great skills, and hopefully more Geoff and Charlie stories. Maybe we'll see. Thank you so much for having us.
Who knows?
Bye bye.
Thank you very much, guys. Bye bye.